Hi everybody. I am super excited to start off with the first video content with my network. And when I was kind of thinking about this, there was kind of one name that I was targeting to kind of launch in a big way, and that is the consumer champion, Martin Newman. So, Martin, welcome. Absolute privilege, Martin. I think the best way to kind of start these kind of conversations is if we get a bit of a background into the amazing career that you've had.
Sure. Well, I'll try and make it as succinct as I can because I've done a fair amount in my 38 years of working. But I think what I'll do is I'll maybe take it back to the time when I got involved in e-commerce and digital for the first time. So it's quite a funny story actually. I was sitting at my desk in the Hillington Industrial Estate in Glasgow. I was a marketing director for a company called Sports Connection. I'd been a marketing director for Intersport before that, and Sports Connection at the time were about the fifth largest sports retailer in the UK. Sadly, no longer around now. But anyway, I was chasing a document one day. My PA was typing it up, and I said to her, "Where's such and such a document?" And she was on the internet at the time, and I was a complete luddite. I'd never used technology. I didn't even know how to switch a computer on, literally. And I said to her, "I've heard about this web thing. Can you show me it? And while you're doing that, maybe you can show me how to switch this big box that's been sitting on my desk for the last year called a computer on, and how to send an email, and just give me a bit of an all-round education." And I suppose that was my kind of mini light bulb moment where I realized that from a career perspective, I was a bit of a laggard on the technology side, and I needed to resolve that and throw myself into it. And from an e-commerce point of view, my gut just told me this is the way everything was going to go, and I wanted to get involved in it. And so I threw myself into it, and I launched a website in the sports trade for Sports Connection. And then not long after that, I actually I had a go at my first business, and I set up a web development business in Glasgow. We were doing domain registration, hosting, some rudimentary digital marketing, but web design and web development, and did quite well for a couple of years. Made a decent amount of money, and then sadly we had to pull the plug in the business because as the .com was booming and busting, and businesses were sort of stopping their investments, if you like, if not actually removing their presence from the web, as they'd lost all faith in it. My business ran out of opportunities. I probably lost my confidence, it's fair to say, at that point as well, because I'd never been through that sort of thing before, through a business failure. But ultimately, which I'll come on and talk about in a minute, it definitely led to the success that I had later in my career, but I didn't know that at the time.
Yeah.
So it's quite painful. So I kind of went back to thinking, okay, I'm not an entrepreneur, tried that, ticked that box unsuccessfully, or should I say, crossed that box. And, sort of went back to a career, and not long after moved down to London and went back into client-side roles and became the head of online and multi-channel at Harrods. Excuse me. I then went from Harrods to Pentland Brands, from Pentland Brands to Burberry. I was Burberry's first head of online in Europe, and then to Ted Baker. And I got a bit frustrated in my client-side roles in the context that I was P&L accountable, but not necessarily fully responsible. And some people listening to this will empathise with that, because in many businesses, even today, big decisions around digital are still made by the board or a trusted member of the board, which can be quite frustrating for people like us who have been immersed in that for quite a while. And that, I guess, was the driver for me to decide to have a go at doing my own thing again. So not long after that, I set up a business called Practicology. I thought there was a gap in the market for a consulting business that was made up of people like me who had practical experience, but with theology, with the science, so the strategy, the science, and the practical hands-on expertise. Anyway, cut long story short, I was very fortunate enough to grow that business from basically me to nearly 100 people in London, Dubai, Hong Kong, Guangzhou in China, and Sydney and Melbourne in Australia. And we sold the business September 2018 to an incredible business called Pattern. So Practicology is now called Pattern. It still does consulting, but Pattern is an Amazon reseller. So they sell a lot of people's products on Amazon and other marketplaces globally, and they acquired Practicology to give them that kind of route to market in all the markets that they also wanted to be in. So that's interesting. I still have an involvement as a shareholder, but I'm not really involved day to day with the business. So I then set about setting up again, which has been an interesting journey. Many times in the last couple of years, where I've kind of thought, why am I going down the startup route again? I've kind of done all that.
Yeah.
But I suppose when you are an entrepreneur, you kind of want to keep proving yourself. It's not so much that I want to prove myself to anybody else. It's more I want to prove it to myself. That practicology wasn't a fluke, and I can go and build something again. But what I do today is a bit of a portfolio. So I have got some technology. I've got a website called Customer Service Action, where I call myself the consumer champion, as you said, and I try to resolve issues for customers, but also help brands understand more effectively how to serve consumers, which is obviously in their interest to do so. So I've got that. I've got an app coming out shortly called Servometer, which is around providing um, consumers with more insight in terms of levels of service, which environments are COVID safe, but also it's also going to be, I think, a really good tool for anyone with a disability in the UK, because accessibility is a real issue for disabled consumers. And believe it or not, there are actually 14 million consumers in the UK that have some form of disability, and they're very badly catered for currently within retail. So more about that another day, I think, but that's coming out early next year. Aside from that, I do a little bit of board advisory work. I'm privileged to be a board advisor to ClearPay, who are the leading buy now, pay later provider. I'm also very privileged to be the non-exec chairman of the retail arm of the Scouts, which is called the Scout Store, and I do some other board advisory work. So that's probably the bulk of it. We may come on and talk about my book at some point. I have a book out.
I think we may. I think
called
we
100
may touch
Practical. You think we might? Well, my first book, here's a hint. My first book was called 100 Practical Ways to Improve Customer Experience, and there might be a second one on the way, but we'll talk about that. So I guess that's the long and short of kind of snapshot of my career, how I got to where I am today, and what I'm up to right now.
Amazing. So, firstly, thank you again for the introduction. I think the first question I've got, which I think is really relevant to the market and something that keeps coming up quite regularly, because you mentioned that you've come from a retail background and transitioned into the digital and e-commerce world. That's a lot of the questions I'm getting at the moment is how transferable are the skills from retail to e-com, and how did you find that?
Well, I was fortunate when I got involved, Terry, because it really was the very early days. In 1997, there weren't too many transactional websites around even then. I mean, the first online transaction was in 1994, which, depending who you believe, was either not Domino's, sorry, was either a Pizza Hut mushroom and pepperoni pizza or a Sting CD.
I was going to say I've got the Sting CD.
Some of the people listening. Well, I was going to say some of the people that are listening today probably don't even know what a CD is, so that's a whole different conversation for another day. It's something we used to listen to music on. But all joking aside, so I was very fortunate because to some extent, I guess, when you're in something quite early, you get to shape it, and you have a role or you have a bigger opportunity to actually define what it looks like for you, because nobody really knew what it was all about. So even fast forward to 2004, when I was going back into the client side at Harrods, these brands were asking me to come in and head up, online, because they didn't know what they were looking for. They didn't really know what skills they were looking for. Now, obviously, things have changed a lot, and there's a lot more knowledge and visibility around that. But I think a lot of the skills are transferable. I think the main thing is, as you know, my passion is hopefully clear already, is about customers, about consumers, about customer experience and customer centricity. So from that perspective, at the end of the day, digital is, and e-commerce essentially is just another channel and another way of engaging customers, of empowering them and enabling them to engage with your business in the way that they want to. So I think if you start with that as the premise, and if you're pretty good, if you have a propensity towards customer service and customer experience, then you can easily take that kind of genuine intent to do better for customers and that knowledge that you have from an offline channel into the online world. I think we kind of overcomplicate it. We think because we can't see it and touch it, because it's up there in the ether, it's the internet. somehow it's massively different. Let me give you an example, right? If I went into a Ted Baker store and I was looking for a new suit, and hopefully somebody, one of the store assistants, came and asked me if I wanted help, they would start by asking me things like, how can I help you? Yeah, sure, I'm looking for a suit. Great. Is it for work? Is it formal? Is it for a wedding? What's it for? So at that point, what they're doing is they're starting to help me filter and narrow down my choices to the point where hopefully eventually I end up with a couple of suits to try on in the changing room and then I buy one.
Yeah.
Now, if you think about what a website does, it's the same thing, right?
Yeah.
It starts by asking you kind of what's it for, fabric, colors, it might talk about pricing, etc. So really, the two things essentially are very closely aligned, and in many ways, I think you can take a lot of your traditional physical retail experience and apply it to do an even better job, potentially online as it happens. Because sometimes people who have only ever started in digital might be missing out some of those more nuanced sort of customer serving, experiences, if you like. But long and short of it is, I think the skills are very transferable.
Amazing. So obviously we're going to come on to the book shortly, but anyone that knows you and knows of you knows that customer centricity is at the heart of everything you do and you believe in. So for brands now, or for people within senior positions that are implementing this customer first approach, what would be your top three kind of pieces of advice for them to ensure that they're offering outstanding experience online?
Great question. Well, the first one would be, and this is a bit of a cheat answer to the question because it's a framework with 10 building blocks, but I created a framework for driving customer centricity. It's got 10 building blocks. It's available to download from my website. You don't need to leave any data. It's not a data capture exercise. So if anyone wants to go to martinnewman.co.uk and go to the blog and the insight page, you can just download it there. So that's a very good starting point. But aside from that, the first thing I always recommend is starting with a focus on employees. So my first building block is about being employee first. So it's not necessarily about what do you do to be successful online, but I think any business that wants to truly put the customer at the heart of all it does has to put its people first. And the reason why I'm mentioning that is I think that businesses today do a pretty poor job of that. You're the headhunter, so you'll have your own perspective on that. But I think we could do a much better job. I talk to millennials and Gen Zs. I've got two Gen Zs in the house, my daughters, who are 19 and 24. And, if you speak to them or speak to any other Gen Z, it's not that they don't want to stay in a business for more than 5 minutes, right? It's not that they have a desperate desire to move around every 6 months or a year. It's the environments that we create aren't relevant for them. We don't make them feel really wanted. We don't give them training. We don't give them a structured learning and development program. We don't show them that there's succession planning opportunities within the business. Many brands today aren't diverse, aren't socially responsible, don't look after the environment, don't look after people, don't have great cultures. These are things that are massively important to Gen Z. And I think it's just a combination of lots of different factors that ultimately leads them to churn and leads them to want to leave a business and look for something else. So I always think for me, that's the number one starting point, because if you don't put your people first, they're not going to put your customers first. So that's the first thing. I think the next thing would be to say, is understanding customer wants and needs. So to give you an example, going back to my days at Ted Baker, I started implementing web kiosks in our stores. And ultimately, they weren't successful. And the reason why they weren't successful is not because there isn't demand for what we call today the endless aisle, where the customer has their access to online stock and maybe a broader range of products than is available in the store at that moment in time. So it's an opportunity to capture additional demand. But the way these things work, they only work effectively when they're store assisted. So when you've got somebody in the store team assisting the customer on these devices, then it can work really well. But if you leave customers to their own devices, they won't interact with it. So I do think it's important to have a decent understanding of where the barriers are and what's actually really going to make a difference to customers in terms of how they perform or what they do in store versus what they do online. And I also think aligned to that, good old walking the floor is something we've lost sight of. So how often, go, ask the web team, for example, because the web team obviously are working on the internet, on the website, mobile, and all the other digital assets. When was the last time they walked the floor of the store if it's a multi-channel business? When was the last time they went and talked to customers face to face and asked them, do you buy online? Do you not buy online? If you buy online, what do you like about it? What don't you like about it? And look at what they're doing in store. You can learn so much just from having these conversations. I always use the anecdote of Sam Walton, the founder of Walmart, who before he passed away had visited all, I think, around about 2,000 stores at that time of Walmarts in the United States. And the first thing he did is he'd get on the tannoy and he'd say, "Hello, my name's Sam. I'm going to be here for half an hour." No idea whether he sounded like that or not. But, come and ask me a question. And the insight that he got from that, both from customers and from his colleagues, was incredible. And he took that back to his business, and it made all the difference. So, I think there's a lot of basic things that we can do like that. But also, when was the last time we bought something online from our own website? When was the last time we walked the journey? We went through the whole customer journey from end to end. Mystery shop, buy a product, return it, call the contact center, engage with the marketing activity, see where it all leads, and you'll get a really good idea. If you just for a second take your business hat off and put your hat on as a customer, you'll get a really good idea of maybe what's not working well and what could be working better. And the final thing I'll mention is this is a line that I coined when I was writing a column for Retail Week about a decade ago, and I was super frustrated about the lack of focus on customer retention, as I am today. And I said that a customer, my headline for this article was, "A customer is for life, not just for Christmas." So, we often talk about a dog being for life, not just for Christmas. It's quite remarkable how few businesses today actually treat customer or actually look at customer lifetime value. And for me, that's the starting point. It's not the top of the funnel. I want to start at the end and work back from that and say, if I want Terry to be worth £5,000 to my business over the next 2 years, what am I going to have to do to make sure I get that business from Terry? What do I need to do to make sure the experience is appropriate? I'm not saying don't do acquisition marketing, but we need to focus so much more on the retention piece, and that's the bit that we do badly. And a lot of that comes down to the fact that customer service and customer experience in most businesses is treated as a cost center, not a profit center. I can't get my head around that. How can you treat customers as a cost and not a benefit? And because ultimately that drives all the behavior. Because if you're looking at customer service and experience as a cost center, you end up making decisions like, it's costing us too much money. Let's take some headcount out. And guess what? Customer service standards and levels go down. Or let's take that technology out, or let's not invest in that technology because the P&L doesn't add up. But that's because the business isn't looking at lifetime value. If it were, then it would make those decisions and it would look at customer service and experience as a profit center. So those would be my kind of first few fundamental tips.
Amazing. It's quite amazing to hear kind of how it's quite simplistic as well if you think about it, but it's just actually implementing it. It's two very different things. So amazing. So obviously looking into that, is there a business that you think is offering an amazing experience online?
Well, again, I'd rather than just talk about online, I'd rather give you
As a
examples
retail,
of businesses. Yeah, that kind of that I think address all of these challenges really well. I mean, the first one I'm going to talk about is AO.com, used to be called Appliances Online. So they are an online business.
Yeah.
But from start to finish in that business, from the front end to the back end, from the minute they recruit people to the minute they deliver and install white goods, fridge freezers and washing machines, tumble dryers, they have a focus on customer centricity. So when they're hiring people, they look to hire people who are both humble and ambitious. Why? Because humility gets you people who are collaborative with other colleagues in the business, gets you people who are empathetic with customers. But the ambition drives them to always want to do better, both to better themselves and better the business. So it's a really, from a cultural perspective, it's a nice sort of set of skills and attributes, if you like, to have a core part of their capabilities and sort of demeanor, if you like. But right down to when they deliver and install a white good, a washing machine or a fridge freezer, most companies that do that, they incentivize the people that are doing the installations and the deliveries by how many they do in a day. It's not about quality, it's about quantity. If you focus on quantity, guess what happens? If I say to you, you need to install 10 washing machines today, guess what's going to happen? Guaranteed, one or two of them, you're probably not going to spend the time that you should be doing making sure that everything is perfect, right? And guess what? You're then going to have problems with the contact center, with customer service, with customers who are going to churn, who are going to be unhappy. You're going to have to replace the washing machine. You're going to have to send people back out there, whatever it is. AO.com's people are incentivized by one thing and one thing only: customer satisfaction. That drives the right behavior. So in that case, I'm not saying to you, Terry, you need to install 10 of these a day. I'm saying to you, you need to get 95% plus customer satisfaction. That's your KPI, and that's the only thing I'm going to measure you on. So guess what? You might only do 3 or 4, but those 3 or 4 are all done properly. The customers love you, they love the brand, they buy more, they talk about it on social media, and they amplify the message about the brand. Timson, family business. Get your keys cut, get your shoes rehealed or resold at Timson. James Timson stripped out the middle layer of management in their business. They don't have a traditional hierarchy that you have in most retail businesses, where you've got all the people in the head office, different levels there. Then you've got regional managers, you've got area managers, you've got store managers, and you've got the people, excuse me, in the store. They've essentially got the Timsons, some senior execs, and the people that run the stores. That's it. So guess what? They are able to get things through much quicker. They're able to facilitate change, to be able to pivot, to react to like a time like the pandemic. When they want to implement something, it's seamless. They can put something out there and it's implemented the same day, because they haven't got all the bureaucracy and all the different layers that most businesses go through. So I think that's a really interesting example. And the final one I'd just talk about is Hunkemoller, who are very successful Dutch lingerie retailer, now international, thousands of stores across Europe. Philip Mountford, who's a fantastic guy who runs that business, brilliant retailer. And they're just a great business. They recognize the importance of insight to generate the insight. They're brilliant at capturing data from customers, what they like, what they don't like. They use that to turn it into insight, which instructs them on products, it instructs them on marketing, on customer service. End to end, that's a brilliant customer-focused business. Very data-led, but not data for data's sake. They're really good at turning data into actionable insight. They also engage, like a lot of successful brands these days, they do really well on social media. Some of the beauty brands, like Beauty Revolution, is another one, where they use social media to develop their product. They actually get feedback from customers, and they're using it as a product development tool. And then they take that feedback, they develop the products, and guess what? There's a pent-up demand to buy those products because customers feel that they've contributed towards the development of them. So those are just some of the ones that come to mind.
Amazing. And we can't not have this conversation without bringing up the book, which I believe was nominated for Disney's Book Award for 2019.
It was nominated for Business Book of the Year, Terry, and can you believe they gave it to someone? They gave the award to someone else.
Wow. How did all that come about? Was it something that you always wanted to do?
The reason why I wrote the book is I've been beating the drum for customer centricity for 25 years now. I've always had this mindset. Okay, obviously it's taken a lot of experience and a lot of time to pass before I guess I had enough knowledge where I thought I could bring it all together and write about it. But the frustration for me was that even I was talking about being customer centric, being customer first, putting the customer at the heart of everything we did. And then I sort of thought about it and I was like, well, what does that actually mean? What does it entail? actually, what does it involve and how do you do it? And I thought there's nothing I've ever seen that describes that. So that's what I tried to do with the first book. And it is a pretty good book, if I do say so myself, which is why I was shortlisted for Business Book of the Year. However, I've got a new book coming out in May next year called The Power of Customer Experience. And the difference is, well, first of all, I know a lot more than I did 2 years ago, 2 and a bit years ago when I wrote it. I'm also a slightly better writer. But this is much more commercial. And it's much more about going back to what I said about businesses treating customer service and experience as a cost center, not a profit center. I'm trying to knock that on the head for once and for all. So, so the book is packed full of brands that have failed, brands that have succeeded, more about the brands that have succeeded, but even with the ones that failed, real clarity on where they went wrong, and the ones that have succeeded, real clarity on where they went well. And of course, it's all grounded in customer centricity, and I bring it right down to each of these different building blocks and the commercial impact that it's had on their business. So no one can have any excuse at the end of this when they've read it, because at the end there's my framework in detail talking about how you go on this journey. And I would urge, obviously anybody to read it, implement it, and it will make hopefully the world a difference and turn any business that's currently more focused on the top of the funnel and doesn't think about customer lifetime value into a much more sustainable business, because it's much easier to sell stuff to people that we've already sold to than it is to try and find new people to buy from us. It's easier and it's more cost effective. You do need to do both, but it's the lack of focus on the retention side that that I hopefully do a decent job of addressing.
Amazing. So clearly, it's been such an incredible career from you, from what you've done, and obviously going into an author. But for me, the power of e-commerce and digital now is bigger than ever, which we're all seeing the importance of having that arm to the business now. But for the future generation of e-commerce, what would your advice be to have a career in e-commerce and actually maintain a career? Because I feel like people jump around quite quickly, in my opinion. That's from a recruiter as well. What would be your advice to have a successful career in e-com?
Well, first of all, I think it's important to broaden your skill set and your knowledge base. Because, when I started e-commerce, and I guess the reason why I end up heading up online is that I had a breadth of skills that were relevant. I have a marketing background, albeit it was more traditional at that time, above the line advertising and everything, because that's what it was back then. It was pre-digital. I still had all of that plus the customer piece and lots of other things to bring to it. So I think the broader you are, the more relevant you're going to be moving forward. Whereas what's happened in the last 5-6 years is people have become very narrow. So you get pigeonholed into, acquisition marketing, retention marketing, if that even exists, analytics, merchandising or whatever it happens to be. So I think make sure you do what you can to learn. And I think what that will do is that will give you the opportunity in the right type of business to say, I'd like to do something new. I'd love to be able to do this for the next year. But, I've been learning up on web analytics. I've been learning up on site optimization. I've got other capabilities here that I think I could bring to the party. And the reason why all of this is important is that if you have any ambition and ultimately somewhere down the line in your career, you want to be a general manager, you want to run a business, whether it's your own business or somebody else's, or you just want to run that channel, you need to have a broader set of skills. You're not going to get that job if all you've ever done is acquisition marketing. So you need to broaden out basically. So I think that's important. And of course, you can do a lot of that yourself. You can read people's books. You can read other people's books. You can join webinars. We live in the world of, webinars left, right, and center these days. There's lots of ways that you can educate yourself, even if the business isn't doing as much around that as it could or should be. So I think that's one. The other thing I would say is I think it's good to work in other sectors. So I think that, increasingly, whereas going back like 15 years ago or 16 years ago when I was at Harrods, back then they would never have thought of bringing in somebody from another sector. But I'm pretty confident these days any retail organization would think about bringing in somebody from travel or from leisure or from another vertical that they perceive to have something different but could be complementary to what they're trying to achieve. And as retail looks to become more experiential, I think some of those other verticals, people that are working in those spaces maybe have a bit more expertise that they might be able to, bring to bear, or they might just be more digitally mature and have the capability to accelerate the growth of digital within a retail business. So I'd be looking at other sectors as well, potentially. And then the final thing is, and this is what we all do badly, and I've done badly in my career as well on a number of occasions, is we take jobs, we take it for the money, we take it for the remit, we take it for the brand. We don't think hard enough about where's this going to lead us to. What, if I take this job, what am I going to be doing in 3 to 5 years' time? And I think that's really important. I suppose just to layer one final thing on top of that would be when you're going for an interview, we all know that we need to sell ourselves. But don't forget the business that's interviewing you is also selling itself. So make sure you get under the bonnet of what it's really like in that business and try and get a feeling of what it's like culturally and everything, and whether or not you're aligned with the type of environment that you're going into. So I think it's just being a bit smarter about where things are going and how you might make yourself more relevant along the way.
Amazing, Martin. Thank you so much for all your time. I know how busy you are. So what I will do, obviously, for everyone watching this, I'm going to share all of the links to Martin's websites, to the books, because they have been highly recommended by so many people within the market. So go and have a look on his website, have a look at the books, feel free to buy them. Martin, again, thank you so much for all your time. And I'm sure we will speak soon.
My pleasure.
Cheers, Martin.
Lovely. Thanks for having me.